GTA Vice City is set in 80s Miami. But have you ever wondered how accurate it is? Well, don't worry, let me tell you. Let's start with the setting. Vice City is heavily inspired by Miami during the cocaine boom of the 1980s. This was a time when the drug trade transformed the city from a sleepy retirement destination to a glitzy, dangerous metropolis. The game nails this transformation, showing us a city where new money is flowing freely, and everyone's trying to get their piece of the pie. The main character, Tommy Vercetti, is our window into this world. He's not exactly a cocaine cowboy himself, but he's definitely cut from the same cloth. Tommy's rise from a small-time criminal to a drug kingpin mirrors the real-life stories of many cocaine cowboys who saw an opportunity and seized it with both hands. The game's portrayal of this rapid ascent to power is pretty spot on, capturing the entrepreneurial spirit, albeit illegal, that defined many of these drug lords. Now, let's talk about the drugs themselves. Cocaine is everywhere in Vice City, just like it was in 1980s Miami. The game doesn't shy away from showing how deeply the drug trade was embedded in the city's culture. From corrupt cops to glamorous nightclubs, cocaine touches every aspect of Vice City life. This reflects the reality of the time, where the influx of drug money reshaped Miami's economy and social fabric. One area where the game takes some liberties is in the scale of violence. While Miami did see a spike in crime during this period, GTA Vice City cranks it up to 11. The constant shootouts and explosions make for great gameplay, but aren't exactly true to life. Real cocaine cowboys were violent, sure, but they typically preferred to keep a lower profile to avoid heat from the law. The game's depiction of law enforcement's struggle against the drug trade is also worth mentioning. In Vice City, the police seem almost powerless against the tide of crime. This isn't too far from the truth. Miami's law enforcement in the 80s was often outgunned and outspent by drug cartels, leading to widespread corruption and ineffective policing. One aspect the game nails is the lifestyle of these cocaine cowboys. The flashy cars, the expensive suits, the luxurious mansions. All of these were hallmarks of successful drug dealers in Miami. GTA Vice City captures this ostentatious display of wealth perfectly, showing how these criminals weren't content with just making money. They wanted everyone to know they had it. The game's soundtrack deserves a special mention. While not directly related to the cocaine cowboys, the music helps immerse players in the 80s Miami vibe. From pop hits to underground hip-hop, the radio stations in Vice City reflect the diverse musical landscape of the era, adding another layer of authenticity to the game's portrayal of the time. So, Vice City drops us into this neon fever dream of 1985 Miami, right? The city's swimming in cocaine. But crack? It's kind of like that friend who says they're coming to the party but never shows up. The game's all about that powder, missing the whole crack chaos that was actually popping off. In real life, crack was spreading faster than a viral dance challenge. We're talking millions of users by the late 80s. But Vice City's like, nah, we're good with just the fancy cocaine, thanks. Now, the violence? That's where the game goes ham. Miami was legit scary back then, with a murder rate that'd make modern true crime podcasters drool. Vice City cranks this up to 11, turning every street into a potential GTA lobby. Here's where it gets kinda yikes. Vice City pretty much ignores how crack hit different communities harder. It's all gold chains and Miami Vice suits, missing the real struggle in the streets. But let's give credit where it's due. The game nails the whole money talks vibe. Miami was swimming in drug cash, and Vice City shows that off like it's flexing on Instagram. We're talking billions turning the city into a real-life monopoly board. What the game doesn't show is the health crisis crack caused. Emergency rooms were more packed than a Supreme drop, but you wouldn't know it from playing Vice City. Now let's analyze gang culture. So, in Vice City, we've got the Cubans and Haitians going at it like cats and dogs. This rivalry isn't just some game dev's fever dream. It's actually rooted in some real Miami heat. Back in the 80s, Miami was like a pressure cooker of different immigrant groups, all trying to carve out their piece of the American pie. The game nails the fact that there were significant Cuban and Haitian communities in Miami. For real, by 1980, about 50% of Miami's population was Hispanic, with a huge chunk being Cuban. Meanwhile, the Haitian population was growing fast, hitting about 60,000 by 1982. So yeah, these communities were definitely a big deal in the Magic City. Now the game paints these groups as straight-up gangs, all about the drugs and turf wars. This is where things get a bit Hollywood. While there were certainly criminal elements in both communities, show me a community without any, I'll wait. The game goes full throttle on the stereotypes. In reality, the tensions between Cubans and Haitians in Miami were more complex. It wasn't just about drugs and drive-bys. There were economic and cultural clashes. Cubans, who'd been arriving since the 60s, had established themselves more in the city. When Haitians started showing up in larger numbers in the 80s, there was some friction. But it wasn't all Grand Theft Auto-style warfare. The game does kind of capture the neighborhood vibe, though. Little Havana and Little Haiti are real places in Miami, and the game's versions give you a taste of that. The colorful buildings, the street life, the music. It's like a postcard from 80s Miami, just with more explosions. One thing the game misses? The political angle. In real 80s Miami, Cuban Americans were gaining serious political clout. By 1985, Miami had its first Cuban-born mayor. Meanwhile, Haitians were still fighting for recognition and rights. The game doesn't really dig into this power dynamic, probably because it's harder to show in a game about stealing cars and shooting rival gang members. The drug trade portrayal is, let's say, enthusiastic. Sure, there were Cuban and Haitian criminals involved in the drug scene, but the game makes it look like everyone and their abuela was slinging coke. In reality, while drugs were a huge issue, these communities were mostly made up of people just trying to make a living, not cosplaying Scarface. One thing the game does get right: the importance of respect and territory. In the real Miami, as in Vice City, reputation was everything. Disrespect could lead to serious beef. But in real life, this played out more in social and economic ways, not just in bullets and boat chases. Though those happened too. Let's be real. The accents and language in the game are a mixed bag. They've got some authentic slang and throwaway lines that'll make any Miami native nod. But it's all dialed up to 11. It's like they took a Miami phrasebook and highlighted all the swear words. Weather and hurricanes. In Vice City, we hear about two major hurricanes that supposedly rocked the city. One in 1984, and another in 1986, named Gordon and Hermione. It's like the game developers thought, you know what this crime-ridden, neon-soaked city needs? Some biblical-level storms. But here's the kicker. In real 1980s Miami, hurricanes were about as common as snow in the Sahara. In actual 1980s Miami, the city was living its best life, hurricane-free. The closest thing to a major storm was probably someone spilling their piña colada on Ocean Drive. Miami was in this weird hurricane drought, chilling, like it had some kind of meteorological force field. The real Miami didn't get hit by a serious hurricane until 1992, when Hurricane Andrew rolled up like an uninvited guest at a beach party. Andrew was no joke. It was a Category 5 monster that caused about $25 billion in damage. But that was well after our boy Tommy Vercetti's time in Vice City. Now, let's talk about these fictional hurricanes, Gordon and Hermione. First off, props to Rockstar for the naming. It's like they grabbed a list of prep school names and said, yeah, these sound threatening. But in reality, hurricane names follow a set pattern, alternating between male and female names. The idea of back-to-back hurricanes named Gordon and Hermione is about as likely as finding a quiet, law-abiding citizen in Vice City. The game's inclusion of these hurricanes might be a nod to Miami's hurricane-prone reputation. It's like they thought, it's Miami, there's gotta be hurricanes, right? But they jumped the gun by about a decade. In the real 1980s, Miami was more concerned with other kinds of storms, the kind involving white powder and guys in flashy suits. The city was dealing with the cocaine boom, economic changes, and cultural clashes. Mother Nature was basically like, "You guys have enough going on? I'll sit this decade out." It's worth noting that while major hurricanes were AWOL, Miami wasn't completely storm-free. The city still got its fair share of tropical storms and minor hurricanes. But nothing that would make the news in a city where drug lords and corrupt cops were the daily headlines. These made-up hurricanes fit right into Vice City's over-the-top nature. Everything in the game is amplified. The crime, the fashion, the music, so why not the weather? It's like they took Miami, already a pretty intense place, and thought, how can we make this even more dramatic? I know, let's add some hurricanes. So, to sum it up, Vice City's hurricane history is about as accurate as Tommy Vercetti's aim after a night at the Malibu Club. The real 1980s Miami was living it up in a hurricane-free bubble, while Vice City was apparently getting smacked around by storms named after your grandparents' bridge club. Fashion and vibe. Vice City nails the color palette. It's like they raided a flamingo's closet and painted the town with it. The game's awash in pastels, neons, and colors, brighter than your future. This isn't far off from reality. 1980s Miami was embracing these hues like they were going out of style, which, spoiler alert, they kinda did. The influence of Miami Vice TV show was huge here, both in the game and real life. It's like the whole city decided to cosplay as Crockett and Tubbs. Now, let's talk fashion. Vice City's characters are decked out in a greatest hits collection of 80s style. We're talking loud Hawaiian shirts, white suits, rolled-up sleeves, and enough gold chains to make Mr. T jealous. This is pretty on point. In real 1980s Miami, you couldn't swing a designer clutch without hitting someone in a pastel suit or a shirt unbuttoned to their navel. The game does exaggerate a bit, though. Not everyone in the 1980s in Miami looked like they were auditioning for a music video. Regular folks wore regular clothes, too, but that doesn't make for exciting gameplay, does it? Let's zoom in on some specifics. The women in Vice City are rocking big hair, bright makeup, and outfits that would make aerobics instructors proud. This tracks with the real Miami scene. The 80s were all about excess, and that applied to hair volume as much as anything else. Fun fact, hairspray sales in Miami during the 80s probably contributed to half the ozone layer depletion. For the guys, Vice City goes all in on the Miami Vice look. Linen suits, loafers with no socks, and aviator sunglasses. This was definitely a thing in real Miami, especially among the wannabe cool crowd. But the game misses out on some of the more casual styles. Where are the stone-washed jeans and members-only jackets? Rockstar. The game nails the bling factor. In both Vice City and real Miami, if you weren't wearing enough gold to set off a metal detector, were you even trying? This was the era of conspicuous consumption, and Miami was flexing hard. One area where Vice City takes some liberties is in the uniformity of its style. In the real 1980s Miami, you had a mix of fashion influences. You had your preppy looks, your new wave styles, and let's not forget the influx of Latin American fashion. Vice City kind of blends it all into one Miami smoothie of style. The game's portrayal of car culture is pretty spot on. Those sleek sports cars and pastel-colored vehicles? Totally a thing. Miami in the 80s was all about showing off your ride, and Vice City captures that vibe perfectly. It's like every street is a car show, just with more random explosions. Architecture-wise, Vice City does a solid job. The Art Deco buildings, the neon-lit hotels, the palm tree-lined streets. It's like they took a postcard of South Beach and turned it into a 3D world. In reality, Miami was going through a bit of an architectural renaissance in the 80s, with the restoration of many Art Deco buildings in South Beach. One thing the game misses? The diversity of Miami's fashion. In real life, you had a mix of styles influenced by Cuban, Haitian, and other Caribbean cultures. Vice City kinda homogenizes this into a general Miami look. Now let's look into the curious case of Tommy Vercetti's aquaphobia and see how it holds up against reality. So, our boy Tommy is 191 centimeters, 6 feet 3 inches, and 88 kilograms, 194 pounds. He's built like a brick house and probably bench presses Ferraris for fun. Yet, put him in water deeper than a puddle, and he's suddenly cosplaying as a rock. Let's break this down with some science and stats, shall we? First off, Tommy's physical stats actually make him a prime candidate for swimming. Taller individuals often have an advantage in the water due to their longer limbs, which can provide more propulsion. His weight-to-height ratio suggests he's pretty fit, meaning he'd likely have good muscle tone and lung capacity. In the real world, a guy like Tommy would probably glide through water like a majestic dolphin, if dolphins wore Hawaiian shirts and had a vendetta against half of Miami. Now, let's talk numbers. In the 1980s, the inability to swim wasn't as rare as you might think, but it wasn't exactly common for someone of Tommy's demographic either. According to a 1994 CDC report, the closest data we have to the 80s, about 37% of American adults couldn't swim the length of a pool. But here's the kicker. This percentage was much lower for younger, fit adults like our boy Tommy. Breaking it down further, a study from the late 80s showed that among adults aged 24 to 54, Tommy's likely age range, only about 5 to 10% couldn't swim at all. And these non-swimmers were more likely to be women, minorities, or from lower-income backgrounds, none of which apply to our favorite Vice City anti-hero. So, what's the deal with Tommy's aquatic ineptitude? Well, in reality, a fit guy in his 30s or 40s would have about a 90 to 95% chance of being able to at least keep himself afloat, if not swim laps around Vice City's marina. But here's where it gets interesting. While Tommy's inability to swim is pretty unrealistic, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. Factors like childhood trauma, lack of exposure to water, or simply never learning could contribute to aquaphobia, or the inability to swim, regardless of physical fitness. In the 80s, swimming ability also had some geographical and cultural factors. Coastal cities like Miami generally had higher rates of swimmers compared to inland areas. Given that Tommy's from Liberty City, the game's version of New York, maybe he never got around to swimming lessons between all the crime and pasta dinners. Finally, let's talk legal status of Tommy. So Tommy got pinched for a multiple homicide in Liberty City, aka not New York, in 1971. The game says he got slapped with a death sentence, but only served 15 years. Let's break this down and see how it stacks up against real-life legal shenanigans of the time. First off, the timing is crucial here. Tommy's crimes went down in 1971, right when the death penalty was doing the legal equivalent of a mic drop in New York. In real life, New York's last execution was in 1963, and by 1971, they were pretty much done with the whole death penalty thing. The official kibosh came in 1972 with the Furman versus Georgia Supreme Court decision, which put the death penalty on pause nationwide. If Tommy did get sentenced to death in 71, he would have been part of a group of about 1,254 inmates nationwide who were chilling on death row when Furman versus Georgia dropped its legal bombshell. After this decision, all these death sentences got flipped to life imprisonment faster than Tommy can hijack a car. Now, here's where it gets interesting. In New York, they didn't just stop at life imprisonment. They went full reformer mode. In 1974, they passed a law allowing inmates sentenced to life to be eligible for parole after 15 years if they showed good behavior. It's like they were setting up Tommy's backstory without even knowing it. But wait, there's more. The game says the Vercetti family used their connections to spring Tommy after 15 years. In reality, this isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. The 70s and 80s were wild times for the justice system, with lots of reforms and, let's say, flexible interpretations of the law. However, getting out after 15 years for multiple murders? That's stretching it thinner than Tommy's patience for shirt buttons. Even with the 1974 law, parole for multiple homicides would be about as rare as a snowstorm in Vice City. Let's crunch some numbers. In the early 80s, the average time served for homicide was about 5 to 10 years. But that's for single homicides. Multiple murders? You're looking at a much longer stretch, typically 20 years minimum, if not life. So, Tommy's 15-year stint is like the Goldilocks of prison sentences. Not too short to be completely unbelievable, but not long enough to be fully realistic. It's in that sweet spot of plausible enough for a video game, but don't try this at home, kids. The idea of mob connections getting someone out early isn't totally out of left field. The 70s and 80s saw their fair share of corruption scandals. But usually, these connections worked more to reduce sentences or improve prison conditions, not spring multiple murderers after 15 years. Tommy Vercetti's legal journey is like a greatest hits album of 70s criminal justice. It's got a bit of everything, but it's not exactly a faithful reproduction. The death penalty angle is as outdated as Tommy's fashion sense. But the idea of a reduced sentence isn't completely bonkers. At the end, I'll give verdict of 7 out of 10 for realism to GTA Vice City. An excellent score if you ask me for a GTA game, especially with Protagonist, like Tommy Vercetti. Rockstar simply locked in and made this massive game. Comment down what you think of this video and subscribe to the channel. See you in next video.